Hello students, and welcome back to our Scratch tutorial series for making our RPGs. Today we're going to be talking about how to add dialogue, conversations, and thought bubbles into our stories. I'm going to show you two different ways. One of them is easier, but doesn't look as good with our pixel art design, and it doesn't allow for more complex interaction. The other one is more difficult to create, but looks far better and lets you do more. When I first load into my game and I press start, I end up on my main screen here, but I would like my character to think a couple of thought bubbles to help the player understand what's going on. To do that, I'm going to go into this when backdrop switches to, and I'm going to select the one that says cave start. That's my first map. In fact, I'm going to move this main cave one out of the way for now and focus on this cave start. Cave start is this map, and I already have it set to go to a certain position and switch to a costume facing a certain way and then show up. This is all good, but then I want it to show some thought bubbles attached to the character. Scratch has some options to think and say things. If I have it say hello for 2 seconds, you'll see that when I hit start, he then says hello in a little speech bubble. I could also have him think, hmm. If I do that, you'll see he thinks, hmm. Now this one I didn't give a time to, so he'll just think, hmm, until something else causes it to stop thinking, hmm. If I only wanted my thought bubbles to show up the first time my character showed up on this page, for example, if he left this room and then came back to this room and I don't want those same bubbles to show up, I would have to add a more complex variable that tells me if this was the first time that I loaded this map or not. But I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to start with adding a think, and I'm going to add, say, for 2 seconds, and then I want to wait. And I want it to wait for maybe 0.4 seconds. Then I'm going to duplicate this. And next I want him to think, maybe I seem to be in a cave. And I want him to think that for longer, because it's longer, and I want someone to be able to read it. Maybe 3 seconds. And I think we'll wait a little longer too. Now when I click on this when backdrop switches to, that'll run this bit of code and we can see how that looks. So he thinks, and then he thinks I seem to be in a cave. That looks pretty good. I'm going to keep adding to this, duplicate this, and I want him to think, maybe that does make sense for 3 seconds. Duplicate that. Since I am a caveman, and then we'll duplicate this once more. But where am I? So now you'll see there's a whole set of things that he thinks. And if I move around, it's still attached to my character, which is nice. So that'll run all the way until there. And now I have a very simple system for thinking or saying basic things when a certain backdrop is active. So now if I press play and then I start, you'll see he thinks all of these things. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so we have that basic system. But when I go into my next world, I want to be able to walk up to one of my characters and have a full conversation. And I'd like it to look a little better than if we just had the text above the character. So I could walk up to this character and I could say hello, for example. This is on my next cave. I could have a say hello. But you see it just says hello right at the start. I haven't walked over to him, and it's still attached to the character, and it doesn't match the style of my game. So instead, I'm going to be creating a custom dialogue system. I have already made some assets for dialogue. You can see them here. I'm going to go ahead and add the first one and make it the correct size. And you can see that this is a pop-up that could appear at the top, shows who is talking, what they're saying, and tells the player what to do to continue. It also looks a lot better and it matches the style of my game. So I'm going to be using these for this conversation. I made these in pixel art, and I have one for each thing that the people are going to say. Okay, I've added all of the costumes, and you'll see that now my text is in order. So I'm going to rename these costumes so that it makes sense. This is my first conversation, so I'm going to make the costumes probably start with 1. I'm going to make it something like 1.1 to show that it's the first text of the first conversation. Then I could make this 1.2 and so on. I'll name all of them and make sure they're correctly in order. Okay, I now have them named and in order. The next thing we need to do is actually create the dialogue system. So I'm going to want to add a variable, and I'm going to call it dialogue. This variable is going to keep track of where we are in the dialogue process. So first, I want when the game starts to set dialogue to 0. This means that no dialogue has happened. That's where we probably want to be. All right, next, when I enter this map, I want this first dialog box, hello there, lad, to pop up. So I'm going to add a when backdrop switches to, and I'm going to set this to main cave, which is this map. And when that happens, I want to set dialog to 1.1. Now I need the system that lets me press X. To do that, I'm going to add on to this when flag clicked set dialog to 0 option, and we're going to make this control showing the dialog and the system that lets us press X to continue. To do that, we need a forever block because we want this to always be running, and we want this item to switch its costume to the dialog number. Sorry, I actually just realized we need to set this to 1. So we're going to want to switch this costume to the dialog number. We could have this run manually, where we manually select each number, but because they're in order and they count up by 1, we can actually just go down to variables and we can set our costume to switch costume to dialog. So now it'll count up by number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then we want it to always be checking an if statement, but we want this if statement to have an else, and I'll explain why in a moment. We want our dialog box to essentially be checking, is our dialog set to 0? If it's not set to 0, we want it to do a bunch of things. If it is set to 0, then we want it to just hide. So let's add that hide block into else. And then let's go down to our operators area. And we want to say if it is not equal to 0. So I'm going to put an equals to inside the not, set this to 0, and add the dialog variable. So if dialog is not equal to 0, first we want it to be shown, we want it to be visible. And then second, we're going to need it to check if X is being pressed. To do that, we're going to put another if block, if then, into the first if block under show. This if block, we want to check to see if the key is being pressed. So we're going to go to sensing, and we're going to add a key pressed block. And we're going to change this key to be the X key because that's what I'm telling the player to use. So if X key is pressed, then we want it to do two things. First, we want it to wait a short amount of time, something like 0.1 seconds. This will make it so that if a person presses X but doesn't let go immediately, it's not going to run over and over and over again. This will give them 0.1 seconds to press X and let go. So after waiting 0.1 seconds, we want to change the dialog box by 1. This means that dialog number will now go up by 1 each time that the X key is pressed. We can test this by clicking on when flag is clicked, and then also making sure that our setting dialog to 1 runs by clicking on the top here. You'll see the first one shows up. Now, as I tap X, you'll see that the numbers slowly change, the dialog goes up by 1, and the next text shows up each time, and I can go all the way through my conversation. You now know two different ways that you can have dialogue show up in your game. One that is a little bit simpler, but doesn't give you as much control and doesn't match with the style of your game. And the other, which gives you a lot more control, and you can make it match with the style of your game if you would like. Go ahead and add dialogue into your game, all of the talking that you'll need with your different NPCs. And our next video is going to talk about fighting, combat, health, dealing with enemies and obstacles. I'll see you in the next one.